What is the first thing you think about when I say picture women in Mexico and India? Do you think of her or her? Through pictures, we are going to explore that women's equality in Mexico and India has been unevenly applied across the populations. It was divided among classes, usually with the elites having more equality than the rest. Although the history of Mexico and India are very different, women face some of the same problems in both countries, including gender roles and limitations by the law. In this video, we are going to explore the way women's lifestyles and roles changed over time. We are going to focus on a particular event in each country that was a period for transition for the country itself. We will see how the women of different classes engaged in the event and how their role changed. We will see their role and lifestyle before the event and after. Due to the difference of history, the events are going to be different. The Porfiriato was a period of 35 years ruled by Porfirio Diaz. It was filled with economic growth and social inequality. It was a period of order and progress through scientific thinking and positivism in order to develop Mexico. It helped Mexico enter the modern age with electricity brought to cities, thousands of miles of railroad built, as well as many factories. It helped the national debt be paid in full. It was not a time of development. It led to a bigger gap between the rich and the poor. Naturally, it also affected women's roles and opportunities in society. However, it offered some benefits for women, including the increase of education and participation in the workforce. Women in the upper class lived extravagant lifestyles, which were influenced by firm fashion, furniture, and culture. They saw the financial and material benefits of industrialization and modernization, shopped at places like Palacio de Hierro, traveled abroad, had access to the telephone and telegraphs, and saw a rise in education in university level courses. They studied in the fields of education, law, and medicine. In both countries, women who were members of the upper class had more liberties than the rest. Yet many times, due to social norms and family preferences, they were not able to use them. Women in the middle and lower class experienced many injustices. They were mostly employed in manufacturing with things as dressmaking, food and beverage processing, and pottery. They were paid less than 1.5 pesos a week. When they could not find jobs in those industries, they would turn to prostitution or to be domestic servants. Economic mobility for these classes was non-existent. A lot of their land and belongings was taken away by the government. The ones that did have houses lived in appalling housing conditions, worse than some major cities in Africa and India. They also experienced hunger and had no freedom of speech. In a way, they were treated as slaves. The Mexican Revolution started in 1910, and some people even argue that it has not ended. It was recognized as the first major political, social, and cultural revolution of the 20th century. It was based around the belief that few wealthy landowners could not continue to own most of Mexico's wealth. The revolutionaries wanted to end the Porfiriato, the repression of elections, and freedom of speech. They believed it was violating the Mexico's constitution. Many people from across different socio-economic classes engaged in the revolution. Women in the upper class participated in the revolution by influencing political circles. They set up all-women organizations to discuss, analyze, publicize, and fight for women's rights in the revolution. Some specific examples of revolutionaries are Soledad González, who was Madero's private secretary, who typewrote the Sección Presidencial, which started the revolution. Another example is Elena Armincendi Mejia, who started the Neutral White Cross when the Mexican Red Cross did not help the rebels and revolutionaries. The major way women got involved in the revolution was as soldaderas. The soldaderas kept alive and furthered the revolution. Some joined on their own while others were kidnapped. Many of them joined because they were tired of being exploited both at home and at the workforce. They helped in different ways. Some took care of the men while others fought in the military. For example, we can see in the picture the women ready to fight with the bullets and rifles across their chests. And now we can see them cooking for the army. Many even pretended to be men in order to fight. Some leaders supported their involvement while others saw them as bad luck. Sadly, none of the women were recognized for their actions. British began to influence India as early as the East India Company establishment, but they got control of the colony in 1958. It was a period of economic exploitation, famine, lack of freedom, and poverty. During this time, many people were loyal to a religion and leaders, so they faced many discrimination. Women had traditional roles assigned to them based on their tradition, religion, ideology, economic development. Their lives were restricted by both the religious beliefs as well as the government. Their opportunities were dependent on their men. Women got blamed for the suffering and evil in society. They were looked down since birth. During this time, women had to deal with issues like sati, female infanticide, child marriage, remarriage of women, secular education, prostitution, dowry, bride price, and the answers to these debates came from the caste and class they were part of. Some argue that upper-class women had a life worth living. For example, we can see the elaborate clothing filled with rich patterns were they able to wear. But many women were restricted on what they could and could not do. Some even had to wear a purdah in order to seclude themselves from society. We can see this through their facial expressions, how they felt about this. However, compared to other women during this time, they had a lot more freedom in material possessions. Many did not know how to read and write. They were denied an education. In 1857, there was hardly one woman out of 100 who could read or write. Arranged marriage was very common due to caste competition. Women also had to provide large dowries and had practiced polygamy as well. Sati was also prevalent, but once it was abolished, remarriage was seen as a negative thing. Many widows preferred death due to miserable conditions that they would be treated. Women were condemned to the house and private life, yet there was an intensified public scrutiny on women's behavior. Many women in the lower class were unaware of their basic rights as individuals due to illiteracy controlled by the men and subordination by them. They were more vulnerable to infant and maternal mortality. They had a lack of education and an increased exposure to violence and rape. Some had to work and some were secluded even more. Here we see an example of women getting ready to sell things at a market. Additionally, it was common for them to be domestic servants and some turned to prostitution. Lower caste widows could marry the brother and father of their late husband because remarriage was common. Many women were not married because they could not provide the dowry to pay. Polyandry was also practiced because of the lack of resources. In addition, it was very common for female infanticide due to the economic liability that women brought. India's independent movement ranged over various years, which were also the years of the feminist movement and fight for equal rights. Women were involved in independence from the early start, yet they were not considered part of the 70s Agartha formed by Gandhi. Some people even urged them to include women, which led to the participation of Sarojini Naidu. After that, women got involved especially in the mass mobilization. It included women from all social classes. In fact, the Salt March believed to be successful because of the women who participated in it. This was also the first time that great masses of Indian women participated in major ways. Their participation in this movement was significant and is recognized as the first time the opportunity to show their capacity and ability to participate in politics and make great sacrifices. Even when men were in prison, the women would take control. Some women who participated are Sarojini Naidu, Kasturba Gandhi, Vijaya Pandit, and Annie Besant. Although the most recognized women involved in the movement were members of the upper and middle class, members of the lower class also participated. They were very active in the mass mobilization movements in the 1920s. Yet many of these women were not able to participate because of bondages, early marriage, widowhood, purdah. Their husbands didn't want them to, or they needed to go to work. Gandhi even encouraged women in the lower classes to participate in the national struggle that serves as a training ground for leadership to further push for women's equality. The independence movement happened around the same time for women's fight for equal rights. It led to the women's right to vote, education, participation in the workforce, and the new outlook in the woman. It even led to the election of women in the national government and the woman prime minister. However, it was not equally applied across. The upper class women were able to see the fruit of the movement in major ways, while the lower class still faced some of the same oppression. In conclusion, we have explored the roles and status of women before and after major events that have affected both Mexico and India. We have seen how women in different classes engage in the events in the best way they could. We have learned about their lifestyles before the events as well. We have seen the change of views of women in society. However, sadly, many women in both Mexico and India still face much oppression both by the government and culture. Both Mexico and India are some of the most dangerous countries to be a woman in today's modern world. There's women are still constricted into gender roles and do not have access to adequate education and safety. We can hope that just like there have been a change in women's equality over the last century, this change will continue on and affect all women in society, and not just a few privileged ones.